Oh, perfect. Thank you. All right, well, I think we'll get started. It looks like we've got several people online now, so I'm happy to see the huge turnout. Um, so real quick, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Matthew Renze. I'm a data science consultant, author, and public speaker. And in recent years, I've also become an advocate for visual snow research from a personal story, which I'll tell you about in a little bit. I've spoken at medical conferences, I've met with experts, I've written articles on the topic, and produced videos on it as well. And that's what led me to the Visual Snow Initiative. They reached out to me after seeing one of the videos that I put online after speaking at a medical conference, and they wanted me to speak at the first ever Visual Snow conference. So I spoke at that conference. We had really good response from everyone, and they asked me to do the live stream to kind of follow up and allow people to ask questions in public, to essentially learn more about my story and to find more about things that they're interested in terms of visual snow research. And so as far as my story goes, it all starts on Friday, February 7th, 2014. It was a pretty usual day for me. I essentially spent my day at work doing data analysis and writing software. And then I had dinner with some friends. It was a birthday party. Nothing out of the usual, except I had a slight headache, but it didn't really hurt, didn't really think much of it. Went to bed that night relatively early, got a good night's sleep. And then when I woke up the next morning, I had quite a bit of brain fog. It was just real difficulty, like thinking, concentrating, and reasoning. And I didn't really know what was going on. I also noticed that I had a pins and needles sensation in my hands and in my feet. It was pretty much all throughout my body, but mostly noticeable in my hands and my feet. And so I just assumed I had a cold or something. Didn't really think much of it. Went to bed. Laid low that day, went to bed. And when I woke up the next day, I had consistent ringing in both of my ears. And I hadn't been exposed to any loud noises the day before, so it just seemed very strange. And then when I opened my eyes, I noticed that I had a slight static across my entire field of vision, essentially like the static of a slightly out of tune analog television. So that was Sunday. And then on Monday, I scheduled an appointment with my general practitioner. He was able to see me, like, I think the next day. But over the course of that week, a series of other issues began to emerge. Like I was seeing after images, both positive and negative after images, those little blue specks of light that zigzag if you stand up too fast or get hit in the head. Seeing those against solid backgrounds on a regular basis, like I just couldn't not see them. Issues with bright lights, being just too bright. I was having a bit of difficulty with night vision as well, halos around everything at night, and then auditory issues as well too. So loud noises seemed annoyingly loud now, and conversations, I was having difficulty making out individual voices in conversations or individual words in conversations. And then any, like, I guess, noxious noise in the environment, like irritating noise, was becoming more noticeable. So like an AC unit, like an air conditioner, even just running in the background, which most people would just ignore. For some reason, my brain was deciding not to ignore, and I would just hear it all the time, and it was terribly annoying. And then also tactile issues, essentially this pulsating buzzing sensation on like it was localized primarily on my legs and I think my arm as well too. And then these really fine tremors. It was just kind of like it just feels kind of shaky, if you will, but it's not like a large or very noticeable tremor. It's only noticeable if I'm sitting still, essentially, but I'd never noticed it before, so who knows. So my doctor was out of ideas. He sent me to the Mayo Clinic. I spent 2 weeks at the Mayo Clinic getting dozens of tests from a variety of experts and specialists in pretty much all the different fields that were potentially related to whatever was wrong with me. After 2 weeks of these tests, everything came back normal. In fact, I was in great health. So they weren't able to give me an official diagnosis, but what they had assumed was what I had was something they called a central sensitization disorder. And now this is one of these kind of, I don't really know how to describe exactly what it is, but it's kind of a category of diagnosis they give you if they don't really know what it is, but it has these symptoms and they can't point it to anything more specific. So it wasn't an official diagnosis. It's just, this is most likely what you have based upon what we know. So that wasn't terribly beneficial to me, because they still really didn't know what was causing it. They didn't know how to fix it, and essentially they just suggested I lay low, have good diet and exercise, maybe take a yoga class, and just wait it out, see what happens. Maybe things will get better over time. So in preparation for my recovery, I just started doing some research on central sensitization disorders. Went online, I saw what the Mayo Clinic had in terms of literature. And with a Google search, something else popped up, an article called Visual Snow, a disorder distinct from persistent migraine aura. And this article essentially described exactly what I was experiencing, like almost perfectly identical. Almost every one of the symptoms they listed was something I was experiencing. And it was the first time that anyone was ever able to explain, what was wrong with me, and like that it had a name, which is surprisingly important when you're trying to explain things to a doctor with just a weird cluster of symptoms and you have no real name for this thing. It's hard to describe. But it gave me a name for this. And as I learned more about it from a series of other articles that had been produced by the same lead researchers and some other researchers working independently on the same topic, I learned quite a bit about what it is and how it manifests itself, or the kind of the cluster of symptoms that are all commonly related to one another. And so based on this knowledge and based on the recommendations from the Mayo Clinic, I essentially started to learn how to manage my symptoms. And I did this through a combination of mindfulness practices, diet and exercise, and just generally improving overall life, the way I was living my life in ways that essentially were beneficial. And over time, essentially, I learned how to manage these symptoms. And by manage symptoms, this is one question that people always ask me. When you say manage your symptoms, do you mean they're gone, or do you mean they're less, or do you mean they don't bother you? It's actually a combination of everything except for them being gone. My symptoms are still here 24/7, every day. But on a scale of 1 to 10, my symptoms when this first started out, I would say were like at a 9. I don't know what a 10's like, but I'm guessing that's pretty bad. But the symptoms were at a 9. And I noticed that they fluctuate in response to certain factors. Certain things make them noticeably worse or noticeably better. So the most significant factor in reducing these symptoms appears, for me at least, is stress. So when I'm stressed out, it's very noticeable. Like the tinnitus gets louder, the visual static gets noticeably stronger, and the I believe it's called paresthesia, the pins and needles sensation grows significantly stronger as well too. But when I'm able to calm everything down and when I'm not stressed out, they go from about a 10 probably down to a 5. And they stay at a 5 pretty much every day. Some days I'd say they're maybe at a 3. Other days they're at a 7. They generally don't get any higher than that anymore. I just don't get stressed out like I used to in response to the symptoms or from anything else that I do. So the symptoms are noticeably less, but in addition to that, they don't bother me like they used to. So if I was walking down the street and I were to, like be flooded with all the, the sound and the images and stuff like that, the noise, it would cause a lot of stress. And now when I have those same experiences, they just don't cause me stress. And that stress, as I mentioned, seemed to feed back in and make things progressively worse. So I think the best way to describe it was I was caught in a feedback loop where the symptoms were triggering a stress response. The stress response was making the symptoms worse. And this was just growing out of control to the point where it was just at a 9 all the time, or maybe a 10. I'm not positive. But now that I've been able to unwire that stress response from the symptoms, I don't seem to have problems like I used to. So that was a huge benefit for me with learning how to manage these symptoms and learn how to live a happy, healthy life on a day-to-day basis. So in addition, I also did quite a bit of data analysis on my meditation session. So I recorded all of the data from each meditation session and along with other data. And I was able to find a night and day difference after a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat that I went on. So it was the first time I ever really got serious about meditating, where I sat down for 10 days and took a meditation retreat or meditation course. And the data that I captured from before and after showed a pretty much night and day difference in my ability to manage my own stress response in response to the symptoms. I just learned how to sit with the symptoms. 10 days, we were meditating for about 12 hours a day. We were doing it in what they call noble silence, where essentially you're not speaking or interacting with anyone else. You're just focused on what you're doing, your meditation practice, and having to experience these symptoms for 10 days straight and in a calm environment, like where I was actively calming my sympathetic nervous system. For me, I believe unwired that stress response. So I'm sitting there with the symptoms. They bother me at first, and they bother me less and less and less. And then pretty soon they don't bother me at all. And once I was able to unwire that response, things got really good. I did a lot of yoga as well too. That helped out tremendously in terms of managing the stress, some of the anxiety and the depression that I was experiencing, because I had no idea what was going on with me and whether things were going to improve or not. And yeah, so that was pretty much my story. And when I discovered that this worked so well for me, I felt that I had to tell this story to other people and tell them what worked for me, because I knew that there are other people out there suffering as well, and that they were looking for anything that could help them out. So my hope is that by sharing this story, it's going to help other people essentially learn that you can live a happy, healthy life with visual snow. You can learn to manage your symptoms. And I know there's some people out there that have had visual snow their entire life and it doesn't bother them at all. And that's why I think there's some connection with the stress response to the symptoms that seems to make this unbearable for some people, but completely fine for other people. And that's essentially the message I'm trying to get across, is that you can use practices like mindfulness, yoga, meditation, a healthy diet, and exercise in order to help manage symptoms and live a happy, normal life. And so because I felt the need to share this story, I spoke at my first tinnitus conference in Iowa City. Dr. Richard Tyler, he's one of the experts in tinnitus around the world, and he essentially invited me to speak there. I told the story, got amazing response from people. We created a video from the presentation, put it online. It got tremendous response. In fact, it's one of the most viewed videos on visual snow on the internet. And then from there, I got asked to write a series of articles in various magazines on the relationship between tinnitus and visual snow. And then the Visual Snow Initiative contacted me, which led to the Visual Snow Conference, which led to this YouTube Live event today. All right, so now we need to get into the questions and answers. So these questions were submitted by people who participated in the Visual Snow Initiative's YouTube Live Q&A contest. And so the questions that were submitted were then chosen by a random number generator so that they would essentially be random questions selected from the pool. I should also note that I'm not a medical professional, so the responses to these questions I'm going to give are not medical opinions. I do data science, but I don't specifically do it in the medical industry, and I'm not a doctor as well. In addition, some of the questions that were selected, I had to defer to other experts. So while I don't feel comfortable answering them myself because they're very specific questions of a medical nature, we're going to push them back to the next round of live streams for some of the other experts in the industry that are more specifically know about that area or experts in that area. In addition, feel free to ask questions in the chat window throughout the entire YouTube Live event. I'm going to have plenty of time at the end here to answer more questions, so just submit some stuff and we'll see what happens. All right, I'll get through a few of these questions and then I have to take a quick break for an intermission, and then we'll answer more questions after that. All right, my first question comes from Christy W. in Michigan. She says, do you have any idea what makes visual snow progress or get worse? The first thing I need to do is note the distinction between like long-term progressively getting worse versus short-term worsening. So I have no knowledge of this progressively worsening for any individuals like in any way that's statistically relevant. Some people live with this their entire lives and don't see any change in it over time. Other people report that it does change over time for them, but I have no idea what the numbers are behind that, or what causes this to get progressively worse for some people, but not others. What I do know is that there are many people that have no change over time. They have whatever the incident is that where the visual snow emerges, and then they go the rest of their life with it staying exactly the same. In some cases, people have reported that it's gotten better over time as well. And in other cases, some people have reported that it's gotten worse. So, and that's the long-term thing. And so I can't really speak to any evidence either supporting that or refuting that. But as far as the temporary worsening, my own subjective experience is pretty strong. I just seem to, you notice these things. And I have a tendency to pay attention to what triggers seem to make things progressively worse. So as I've identified, number one for me is stress. The more stressed out I am, the more the symptoms just crank up in terms of intensity. If I have a migraine, and now I got to be careful with this because I don't know for sure that these headaches are migraines. If someone would have asked me before I talked to a doctor about it, I would have just said, no, it's just a headache. I know friends that have migraines, and I don't think this is a migraine. But as I've described it to doctors, they say, no, yeah, that's classic migraine. So if I have one of these headaches, everything gets progressively, noticeably worse. Same thing happens if I have a lack of sleep, if I stay up too late, or if I don't get enough sleep. All of the symptoms are noticeably worse. If I have a cold or the flu, symptoms are noticeably worse as well. Hangovers, that definitely does it. And then I believe I've noticed a increase in symptoms if I have too much sugar. And by too much sugar, I mean like a lot of sugar. Like if I eat a big piece of cake, things seem to get worse. Or if I have too much sodium. A lot of fast food seems to make it worse. But once again, it's hard to tease out exactly if that's causing it to be actually worse or if my blood pressure is going up. I don't even know. But I do know that the stress and the migraine, the lack of sleep, those things are significantly more impactful than something like having a piece of cake or too much sodium. So I'm also starting to notice something, and I believe this is really weird, that there seems to be some response to humidity. Like in low humidity, I don't seem to be bothered as much, or no, sorry, I have that backwards. When the humidity is low, I seem to have a worse response to it than when the humidity is high. But at this point in time, I'm collecting data, I'm analyzing the data, I have no idea. So I probably shouldn't have even mentioned that. Also, my visual snow symptoms now, they're essentially, they're much better. So on a scale of 10, I would say my symptoms are somewhere right around a 5 now. So if that was just in response to stress and getting my life back under control, I would say that constitutes a temporary change. But maybe these things are slowly, gradually getting better over time. It's really hard to notice long-term changes because of something called change blindness. So you don't notice them because they're changing so slow. But what I can tell you for certain is I am way better than I was, several years ago. All right. Next question. What will be the future of, this is from Henkel J in the Philippines. What will be the future of visual snow once the human brain is mapped out? So I personally believe that we're eventually going to have an understanding of both the cause and a treatment protocol for visual snow someday. I think having a deep knowledge of how the brain works will be quite beneficial to this. However, I don't know that it's going to be necessary in order to understand both the cause and the treatment. But obviously, the more you understand the brain and its function and the pathologies of the brain, the more information you'll have in order to both understand the cause and then treat diseases like visual snow syndrome. Gavin R. from the United Kingdom asked, it appears that visual snow has a link with tinnitus being more well-known and researched over the years. Do you believe if a cure treatment were found for tinnitus, that it may also have the potential to cure or treat visual snow? So now I've talked with several of the top experts on tinnitus in the world, like Dr. Richard Tyler, Phil Gander, and Will Sedley. These guys, essentially, they spend their days and nights researching tinnitus, and they would be much more qualified to answer a question like this. So once again, I can't give you a medical opinion, but I'd be happy to point you in directions where you could find really good information on this stuff. It seems plausible to me that if they have a common underlying mechanism, that like learning how one manifests itself and how one is treated may be beneficial for treating the other. However, the methods of treatment may not be transferable. Currently with tinnitus, the treatment mechanisms largely involve sound-based devices. Now, whether that applies the same way with vision, I don't know. In addition, there's some research being done with vagal nerve stimulation as well too. Whether that would affect both, once again, I don't know. And a lot of the experts also are skeptical of some of these treatment methods as well. Unfortunately, with tinnitus, there's not like a one-size-fits-all solution. Some people seem to have improvement with certain devices for tinnitus retraining. Other people don't. Some people claim to have a worsening with the tinnitus retraining. So if you are interested in more information on tinnitus, though, at the University of Iowa, every year they have a tinnitus conference. It's probably one of the largest gatherings of experts on tinnitus in the world, if it's not the largest gathering. That's the first place where I spoke on visual snow. And they actually allow patients to attend the conference. So if you're interested in learning more, you can attend the conference and learn what the latest research is from the experts that know what they're talking about. All right, question number 4. Let's see, is from Vanessa D. in Missouri. She asks, during your talk at the Visual Snow Conference, you discussed many of the tools that helped you cope with this syndrome, such as mindfulness, meditation, and yoga. You also mentioned the calming effects of these activities and the ability to suppress overactive sympathetic tone. Many people with visual snow syndrome report having concurrent diagnosis of autonomic dysfunction, such as POTS, which is a postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or at least some symptom consistent with it. And then she lists some symptoms. Do you believe visual snow syndrome has some direct link to autonomic nervous system dysfunction, particularly unnecessary upregulation of the sympathetic nervous system? Once again, not a medical expert, so I can't give any medical opinions on this. And in fact, this is actually the first time I'd heard of POTS, the postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. However, when I was at the Mayo Clinic, I was tested for orthostatic hypotension, which I believe is the test that they do for this type of thing. And they said it was slightly anomalous, but still within the normal range. So from their opinion, I didn't have any issues of that nature. I mean, it seems plausible given the number of people that with visual snow that report stress disorders or anxiety issues. And for me, since managing stress has been the most important factor in my ability to learn to manage and live with visual snow, I mean, it seems plausible. But once again, I'm not an expert and I don't research in this area, so I can't say for sure. Let's see. So I have to do a quick little intermission here just to mention a few things for the Visual Snow Initiative. So first, Visual Snow Initiative, they've got a CrowdRise funding campaign going on through the end of November. Their goal is to raise $50,000 matched by a private donor, dollar for dollar, up to $25,000. And while they're on track, they can't achieve this goal without everyone's help. So everyone's donation truly counts. If you're interested in where the donations go to, the money raised will be used to create a Visual Snow Global Research Fund, and it will directly fund visual snow research in 2019 in the US, England, and Australia. And if you'd like to donate, you can donate through CrowdRise. It's www.crowdrise.com/Visual Snow Initiative. I assume someone will probably put the correct link in the sidebar, or go to the Visual Snow website and click on any of the donate buttons, and it'll take you to that location. And if you're interested, the Visual Snow Initiative, they have some recent developments. They've obtained the rights to one of the best visual snow simulators in the world. It shows all of the other related visual symptoms as well. And the simulator will allow you to, will allow those with visual snow to show others, their family and their friends, how they see the world. And it will also be a beneficial instrument for diagnostics, for physicians as well. And this simulator will be available soon on the Visual Snow Initiative website, which is www.visualsnowinitiative.org. And the Visual Snow Initiative would like to thank everyone for participating in this event. It truly is a global effort. Everyone's helping to see, to end visual snow syndrome. All right, so let's get back into the questions here. So the next question is from Stuart M. in the United Kingdom. He asks, do you think a cure will be found now that visual snow has been acknowledged as a separate condition? So yes, like I said before, I believe at some point in time we'll have a full understanding of the cause and a rational treatment protocol for visual snow syndrome. In addition, I think it's important to acknowledge that the fact that they have now listed as a separate condition is going to be tremendously beneficial to the research and to moving this initiative forward. When it's just this kind of random cluster of symptoms and they don't have a name for it and they don't have a criteria to test for, it's just really difficult for people to research this thing. But now that it's got a name, now that it's got kind of a movement behind it, and that people are actively researching it under the same umbrella of visual snow syndrome, that is definitely tremendously beneficial. So now I think there's a need to educate the medical community and the general public so that people are aware that this is a real condition and that the medical community knows what to be looking for and where to send people once they do have a diagnosis. And we also need to fund the research in order to discover both the cause and the cure. That's essentially how we'll move this forward. Next is Charles C. from New York. He says, when you started practicing mindfulness meditation, did you notice a worsening of symptoms at any point, either temporarily or permanent? So that's an interesting question. I personally didn't notice either a temporary or a permanent worsening. However, I was informed before I began the meditation retreat that a lot of people noticed similar symptoms, I guess. I'm not sure how to describe it. So when you're doing these meditation sessions, you become very sensitive to bodily sensations and just input, essentially the data coming in or the information coming in through your sensory organs. And this increased sensitivity to these things makes some people notice things that they wouldn't normally notice, things that your brain would normally block out. And they notice it temporarily. Sometimes it freaks them out a little bit. Other times they're just like, oh, because I'm meditating, and they just move on. But while I didn't notice anything, the fact that they informed me of this beforehand indicates that there definitely are people that do notice the symptoms more when they begin meditating. But I think the important thing to note with the meditation is this need to unwire your stress response from the symptoms. And I think once you can do that, that will help tremendously, or at least for me, that was the thing that helped the most. Danny D in Illinois asks, can people with visual snow legally drive cars? Right off the bat, I should note that I'm not a legal professional or a medical professional, so I can't really say for sure. But I know I can drive just fine. I've got better than 20/20 vision. I've never had an accident in my life, and I have minimal issues for driving with visual snow. The only thing I would say that is noticeable is at nighttime, it's a bit more difficult. There's a lot of halos with the car lights and stuff, but I've just learned to compensate for that, and I feel completely safe driving myself. However, others with visual snow may be of an entirely different intensity of visual snow, or it may have entirely different effects on them. So I can't speak for them. I would say if you can pass the vision test and you feel comfortable driving, then I personally will. But if for whatever reason they tell me I can't, then I won't. KCK from Texas asks, I've had visual snow since June. It seems to follow a series of anxiety and panic attacks. As a mom of two, I work at the high school, and I'm struggling every day to live with this new normal. So fearful of this becoming worse. I don't want to fear it, but knowing people have it is hard. Why is it that some visual snow patients get worse and others don't? The unknown of this condition frightens me. I also have tinnitus. So, Casey, right off the bat, what you're going through is actually very common for a lot of people with visual snow, at least from the people that have reported to me over time. In fact, I hear a very similar story quite often. And my story was pretty much the same. I was in really bad shape. I mean, I'll be honest and admit it. I was not doing well at all when I first came down with these symptoms. I had no idea what was going on. Wasn't sure if I was dying. Nobody could tell me what was going on. Half the doctors thought I was making it up or I was crazy. And the other half, while they believed me, they're just like, sorry, there's nothing we can do for you. So it just really is not a good state of affairs in terms of mental health to the way things currently exist in the medical community. There's just not enough knowledge, and there's not really anyone that can help yet. But first, don't give up. There are experts that are working on this. I've talked to several of them. They are dedicated to finding the cause and a cure for visual snow, and I believe they will, provided we have the research, the funding, and we do this the right way. Second, realize that there are plenty of people out there that live happy lives with visual snow, but also realize that there are a lot of people that are having a really, really difficult time with this. In fact, I hear from them on a regular basis. They're just really struggling and they're not sure what to do. Now, to the best of my knowledge, and once again, this is largely my own personal experience, the difference between those that are really struggling and those that are living happy, productive lives appears to be whether they have unwired this response from their stress and the symptoms. The people that get stressed out by the symptoms seem to progressively have a downward spiral, and the people that have unwired these symptoms from the stress response seem to just go about their lives, and it's slightly annoying, but it's not like life altering anymore, or it's not debilitating. So the third thing in this case then would be, if you're really looking for help, the best thing I can recommend, once again, based on my own personal experience and the recommendations of several of the medical experts that I've talked to over the years, is look into things like meditation, look into yoga, make sure your diet and exercise are in good shape. And then in addition, I would also recommend looking into mindfulness-based stress reduction and cognitive behavioral therapy. I read several books on these topics just to better understand how my mind works in response to stressors and anxious thoughts and stuff like that. And what I found the information tremendously beneficial. To have a framework of understanding how you would then recommend to anyone is try a 10-day Vipassana meditation course. You can go to their website. I think it's just vipassana.org, and sign up for a 10-day meditation retreat. Go through it. It's going to be difficult. It was one of the most difficult things I've done in my life, but it had a huge impact. It was tremendously beneficial for me, and I can't recommend it more highly. And then I think finally, at some point in time, you just have to recognize that there are things in our lives that are inside of our control, and there's things that are outside of our control. And learning to focus on the things that you have control over and just be comfortable with those things that you don't have control over is just tremendously beneficial in terms of managing stress and just the overall outlook with these things. The things you do have control over are, like mindfulness practices, getting your diet in good shape and exercise. And the things you don't have control over are, what potentially is going to happen down the road. There's just nothing you can do about that. All right, so I think we're out of time, but for anyone that has put questions in the chat window that would like to stick around, I'll hang around for a few more minutes and just answer questions that were asked in the chat window. I've got to make sure I'm logged in here for those questions. But for everyone that is planning on taking off, just real quick, thank you very much for joining us. I enjoyed this experience as well too. And I would like to thank the visual snow experts that are actually moving the research forward. People like Peter Goadsby, Christopher Shankin, Joanne Fielding, Yasser Khan, Owen White, and Jim Fulton, and everyone at the Visual Snow Initiative, including Paul, Sierra, Stephen, and Justin. Everyone is doing a great job moving this ball forward. And thank you to everyone that's participating and actively working to see that visual snow research moves forward and that we come up with an understanding to the cause and a cure for visual snow. Thank you. All right, so for anyone else that's sticking around for a few more minutes, I will answer a couple more questions here from the chat window. My friends at the Visual Snow Initiative have essentially taken the questions and have organized them for me so that hopefully we'll be able to move through them here pretty quick. All right, so first question is, could you please tell me what device and software you use to monitor your skin response and heart rate for biofeedback and neurofeedback? So the device I use for biofeedback is a device by a company called Wild Divine. It's called the IOM Pro. Unfortunately, they don't sell it anymore, and the versions that they do sell now do not have galvanic skin response, the thing that measures your skin's electroconductivity. So unfortunately, I can't recommend them. I'm really hoping, in fact, I've written a letter to them, I think I did, or I'm going to write a letter if I haven't, to ask them to bring back the IOM Pro, or at least add galvanic skin response to their hardware. Because for me, without the GSR, the galvanic skin response, it's not enough information for me to actively recommend it to people. The immediacy of like seeing your galvanic skin response change is just hugely beneficial for noticing when you begin getting stressed out by thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations. And it's just, for me, that made a huge difference in my overall meditation practice. For neurofeedback, I use a device called the Muse. It's available commercially. I think you can pick them up at Target. They just released a new model like a couple weeks ago. I haven't tried it yet, but if it's as good as the original, it's definitely worthwhile. What it does is it essentially is an EEG, sits and monitors brain waves coming off of from your brain, and it will notice when you become distracted. There's enough of a signal in the brain waves leaving our cranium that they can actually pinpoint if you become distracted or not. So it's just enough of a nudge that when your brain begins to wander, they give you a little signal, and you notice that your mind has wandered, and it helps tremendously, that feedback loop, moving your meditation practice forward. Next question. Have you ever experienced increased visual snow after a yoga class or physical exercise? During the practice, whenever I get exhausted, I start noticing more dots flickering on the walls of the room. You know how bright the walls can be in the yoga centers. So yes, I have actually. When I go for long bike rides, or when I used to go for jogs, I don't run anymore because of knee issues. I would notice afterwards the pins and needling sensation would get stronger. The visual snow would get stronger. So I do actually notice an increase. I guess I've never mentioned that before as things that temporarily worsen it. And the reason why is every time it happens after exercise, it doesn't bother me. And I think it's just because I feel good from exercise. It's kind of like pain when you exercise. Like if you're exercising and you feel a bit of pain from working out, it's a good pain. So I don't know. But yeah, I have noticed it, and I've never really mentioned that in the talks that I've given before. Next question. Are balance problems, like surveys in the visual snow research projects, have ever found any correlation, whether small or strong? But I mean, I can see a plausible explanation for why those could be connected. But once again, it's all speculation, so I can't really say. Next question. Do you use sunglasses, dark contact lenses, tinted lenses to cope with the condition? So interestingly, I do. These right here are my glasses that I wear. They're Theraspecs. They're FL41 precision tint lenses. When I use computer screens for a long period of time, I wear the glasses. When I go outside, I wear the glasses as well. I'm trying to experiment with them to see if they really do make a difference. The best way I can describe it is, at least to the best of my knowledge, with having used them for over a half a year now, that they're about as effective as a regular pair of sunglasses, but since they're not blocking all of the spectrums of light, it's a lot easier to see with them than with a pair of sunglasses walking through the house. So while they do appear to help, I don't know that it's doing anything permanently to help other than just making it better when I'm wearing them. I do also notice that if I stare at a computer screen for too long, things get worse. Oh, in fact, I should have mentioned that as one of the things that makes visual snow temporarily worse for me. So I wear them when I'm using a computer screen because the screen produces light, that blue frequency of light in excess. So if you're staring at that all day long, in theory, it can cause migraines and make other things worse. It seems to have helped with the migraines, but there's a series of factors that seem to determine whether I end up with a migraine or not. And I think it's more than just the light. It seems like certain things like neck tension combined with staring at a screen for too long, which those two things are obviously commonly associated with one another. If you're sitting at a computer screen typing all day long and your neck is in a weird posture and your eyes are being exposed to this. So I just take breaks, and taking regular breaks seems to have been the best thing overall. And then once again, it sounds weird, but keeping the humidity at a reasonable level in my house seems to help with the migraines and the stress response as well. But once again, it's pretty speculative. I need to understand better what's going on before I tell people to buy a humidifier or something for visual snow. I don't know. Let's see. Have you tried a ketogenic diet, and would you believe that it can or cannot help with visual snow? I do actually have a mostly ketogenic diet as is. I don't know specifically whether it helps with visual snow or not, but I know it helps me a lot. I just feel better in general. I try avoiding sugars and carbohydrates and processed foods as much as reasonably possible. I'm not going out of my way to avoid these things. If I'm having cake with friends, I'm going to have a piece of cake. But at the same point in time, the bulk of my diet is kind of the inversion of the food pyramid. So I've got nice healthy fats at the top, and then proteins, and then minimal carbohydrates at the bottom. So I guess if you flip the pyramid around, ultimately the ratio of fats to protein is much higher than the ratio of carbohydrates. But that's not specifically for visual snow. That's just a lifestyle choice for me. It seems to work well for me, anyways. Have you had any sort of success in the area of reducing visual snow? What has been most successful for you? So this specifically was the mindfulness practices, and of the mindfulness practices, specifically the 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat. It's just night and day difference for me. It looks like the YouTuber here that asked this question is a visual snow researcher. If you're interested, I'd be more than happy to provide you with the data and the new stuff that I'm working on as well too. I now have about 5 years of meditation data, and I've seen patterns in it that I personally think are very interesting, and I've shown them to other researchers. They also think they're interesting too. So, and this is essentially what has led me to this weird correlation between lack of humidity and stress response. So, but like I said, I need to do more research there. Do you still see visual snow symptoms every day? I've been curious about whether getting used to or managing one's symptoms means not seeing them or simply not responding to them. So I actually think there's 3 parts to this. So number one, my symptoms are temporarily worsened if I'm managing the stress. But number 2, I don't seem to notice them as much either. So, and it's hard to describe this. For people with visual snow, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But there's having the symptoms and being aware of the symptoms, and those are 2 separate things. So the symptoms definitely have decreased in terms of their intensity, but the frequency that I notice them is also significantly less as well. So the combination of those 2 things, I would say, have definitely improved for me. And then not responding to them. That's the 3rd thing. And so the 3rd thing then is how you're actually responding to these things, which, as I've mentioned, I feel like I've unwired that stress response. So even when I do notice the symptoms, and even when the symptoms are bad, like if I've got a cold or the flu, they do not stress me out. So all 3 of those things, I think, are components to this. And like I said, it's difficult to explain, but for those of you with visual snow, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. Were there, let's see, where was your meditation retreat, and can you specify the name of the organization? So the organization is the Vipassana. Let me see what their name is. I think if you do a search for Vipassana meditation, they're probably going to be the first link. It's dharma.org. So www.dhamma.org, And that's the organization. They have locations all over the United States. I specifically went to the location in Illinois for my first 10-day retreat. And then I went back there for a 3-day kind of refresher course, just seemed beneficial. So if you're looking for an organization, they're the only ones I can recommend because they're the only ones I have experience with. But I'm sure there's plenty of other organizations out there that are equally beneficial. But the one thing that that you can, well, look into them. I was initially skeptical of pretty much everything until I learned that this organization is actually a great organization. They're doing everything on a kind of a pay it forward system. You don't pay them any money to attend the course. You attend for free. Then after you're done, if you found it valuable, you can donate to the organization. As much as you want. You can, they told me how much it costs to send each person through, so I could donate for, a single person, 2 people, 10 people, whatever I found in terms of value, I could make a donation in response. And so, or if you didn't find any benefit, you don't owe them anything. So the organization, it's just a really good organization. I couldn't recommend them any more highly than I am. So, all right. So I think that was the last question. So thank you again for everyone who stuck around here for some extra Q&A at the end. I've got to finish up an online course, which is why I've got all the lighting in the background. It's the last day of working on this online course on data science for executives. And then I have to hop on a plane to Barcelona and then Lithuania after that for conferences. All right, so thank you very much and have a great day.